The tech cards you decide to play in your deck can often decide how well you do in any given game or tournament. So each format, I like to make a tier list discussing the validity and effectiveness of every of the most popular tech cards that exist within Yu-Gi-Oh! And this format is no different. With the release of Justice Hunters, we are within a new era of Yu-Gi-Oh! So it is time to discuss the best staples and tech cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now. Before we get into this list, let me know if you guys like this type of content. If you guys want to see more tier lists discussing the competitive aspects of Yu-Gi-Oh!, then please let me know. As well as like, subscribe, and make sure to never miss a video. So before I get into the actual cards, I need to go over kind of the parameters of the tier list and how the discussion is going to be formed. The way I structure these tier lists is not a simple S tier, A tier, whatever, because tech cards kind of fall in a couple categories. I'll be talking about the best staple cards. These are cards that will normally be in your main deck, but sometimes side deck depending on the deck. The next tier is best side deck only cards. These are cards I think are really good to be in like every side deck, but I probably wouldn't main deck them. Then I have these solid staple sections, so these are a tier down but still worthwhile to consider. And then the same for side deck, solid side deck options. And then that's where we get to cards I'd avoid. So these are cards which, truthfully, if they're not on the first two tiers of playing, aren't worth main decking or siding. And then lastly, I have a tier called needs testing. And these are ones that I think have some merits to them, but I haven't play tested enough to know for sure. Now, there's one other thing to go over. This format is dominated by mostly VS K9 and Yummy. And both those decks are weird. Even Dracotail is weird, where due to the way the format is shaped around them, different decks have different uses for non-engine. They have different abilities. For example, in Vanquish Soul K9, you have to be careful that you're not messing up your attributes too much. Or if Dracotails, anything that's in monster form is automatically better if you can than in something in spell trap form. So we need to keep that all in mind as we're discussing lists here. And that's why some cards that may be designated a best staple aren't worthy of being in the main deck of, say, Vanquish Soul. So you need to understand which deck can play, and then if you can play those cards, that's when you should take this advice from the list. But okay, no more faffing about. Let's talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Staples. Okay, so Ash Blossom has repeatedly found itself at the top of the best staples list, which is ironic because it's a card that I often said was overrated in the years leading up to when I started YouTube. But Ash Blossom is still one of the best staple cards to main deck. But Ash is both a fire for Vanquish Soul, a monster for Dracotail. It's a good card to stop Charmies. You can stop Poly Special from deck. You can stop Stake Your Soul. You can stop Obedience School. There's absolutely no reason to not play 3 of it in your main deck. Actually, there is a reason. This is a big trend for hand traps in general right now. And that is hand traps arguably got worse because they interact poorly against K9 cards. So some decks will opt to go away from hand traps altogether and play effectively 0. Or only hand traps that are truly trap form, like Infinite Impermanence. And if you do that, then Ash Blossom probably doesn't make the cut. I do think that hand traps are superior right now. And I think you can mix some level of breakers in with hand traps, and you'll see my tier list reflects this kind of ideology. But for the most part, I wouldn't be so quick to forego hand traps altogether. I think they're too impactful. And after all, we're talking about Ash Blossom, so it's not like we have too much to discuss here. Next up on this list is Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. So Ghost Ogre is a card that I shit on quite frequently, a card I'm not too fond of because it really feels like popping a card and not negating its effect is just not worth it, because it's also inflexible in terms of usage. You can't preemptively pop something the way you can Nibiru a card and summon before it uses the effect, or you can't steal with Nash Knight off of Izuna or Holly's Who Steal when you choose. It's rigid, and its removal type is also the worst, just raw destruction. Still, Ogre ends up being pretty good this format. It's not brilliant, it's not one of the best cards, but if you're looking for additional hand traps, honestly, it impressed me a lot when I played it at Vancouver. It was a card that I was truly hesitant to play at the YCS, but it actually was good because not just its intended purpose, which was to stop Ripper and hit Lupus, which was actually very good still, but against Yummy, I found it quite useful to either put the field spell in grave, which sometimes can matter, or hitting the Snatchy on my turn to play aggressively actually was rather solid, and it could throw a wrench into their plans quite often. So Ogre for me felt it was actually more flexible than I gave it credit for. And if you're looking for additional hand traps to play, especially if you're taking on the mass hand trap approach that I kind of showed you all with Dracotail in Vancouver, then Ogre has a good spot. And I think for me, it is a solid staple. Nothing I would rush to main deck, but is worth considering in the future. That brings us to Ghost Bell. So Ghost Bell is an interesting one, a card which I was a little bit back and forth on in terms of playing ahead of YCS Vancouver. but ultimately became clear it was one of the best side deck only staples. It is not useless as Vanquish Soul, but it's also not good. It's one of the worst possible hand traps to have any sort of effects against VS, and I can't imagine wanting to keep it in said matchup. It's also why you won't see it in main decks really of these decks either. When they need earths, they go somewhere else. That being said, it has performed quite well for me against several different decks. Obviously versus Malice it's playable, but from the new decks, hitting Dracotail cards, it actually proves to be quite impactful to hit the traps, because it means you could force through either attack with monsters or spells, which can both be a nuisance to deal with, as well as you can cut off their flow of resources by stopping the second trap, therefore meaning they can't infinitely cycle the traps anymore. But then versus Yummy as well. Bell preventing the field, not really that important. But when you're trying to break through the Yummy field, which can be done, Bell helps significantly to stop a Synchro or this Yummy Surprise. While Bell isn't going to be a game ender, it trades very favorably. It's a card that forces them to play around the Bell, and I think it's like one of my favorite types of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it's very good, but it's not going to be game ending, and it's not a Floodgate either, and it forces unique game states. So I'm very happy to say this is probably one of the best side deck cards right now. That brings me to Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries. That's the name of the card, yes. So this is a card which I considered for a brief moment to play at Vancouver. And the reason is it fills the role I was looking for. Remember, the role I was looking for my hand traps, stop Ripper. And Reaper can hit Ripper. Ironically, what dissuaded me was I wasn't sure if people would play the Chronomaly of Mana, which is a monster negate as well, that pretty much obsoletes Reaper for Ripper in that position. Reaper, just give me a goddamn aneurysm. Reaper has other applications as well, in theory. For one, versus the Yummy, you hit Snatchy and that hurts. It stops your ability to do a lot. Their way around that is that they can get the field spell in graveyard, it can put back banish cards, so it's not going to be a game ender, but it should slow them down or make things awkward for them quite a lot. And if that's the goal, then that's fine. That's pretty solid. And then the last one is versus Dracotail, hitting Arthalion, right? If you hit Arthalion, then what do they do then? The problem is, however, they could fuse without a monster in field. So if they start with Rahu or Phimena, then can't Reaper, not a well at least. And then the other problem of the traps can put back banish cards, right? So again, it's going to slow them down, but it's not going to be a permanent change in the game. That being said, this is something I do want to try, and it's the first card in the needs testing section, where I feel like it might have promise. In fact, I saw an OCG list playing Reaper, and it made me think, is this a card that's worth playing? And this might be the first time in a long time that Reaper has a place, because it's actually decently effective against all three decks in theory, but not game ending either, but still worthwhile. Then last, Ghost Sister, not counting Dogwood, is Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill, a card which anybody on my Classroom Patreon knows I considered as another replacement for Ghost Ogre, because in theory it can deal with Ripper, but it can't if you get Lupus, and its inflexibility for usage is rather disappointing. And unlike in the OCG or Master Duel, Ghost Mourner does not work against Azuna or Lupus, so it's not effective in that regards either. For that reason, I think it's just very much below every other hand trap you could play in the metagame, so it's a card I'd avoid playing. And that brings us to the next batch of hand traps, the Mulcharmies, which have been really at the precipice of competitive play since their release. I think that will stay the way for a while, with I think Fualos and Perulia both being main deckable cards. Now, I think Perulia is the little more sketch of the two in theory, because as people are shifting a little bit more away from the VS K9 deck, it's not as maybe impactful as it would have been a week or two ago. Also, not every deck can main Perulia. You may have to decide, for example, in VS, which of these you want to play. And Fualos is for sure the more all-encompassing thing, where it hits a lot more matchups, as well as can be more impactful when it resolves. But both these cards are fantastic, right? Yummy can still use multiple card summons in the hand, so can Vanquish Soul for sure. If Dracotail doesn't really, Malice doesn't really, but usually you get one draw out of them, so it's not the worst. It's good versus Ryzeal too, and yeah, that means that Perulia is definitely worthwhile playing, and I do consider it a main deckable card. Fualos as well. That brings us to Meowls. So Meowls before I'd consider was one of the best side deck staples, because I really felt like it helped a lot versus Malice. But Malice, like, even though it's still strong, has without a doubt fallen to the wayside in popularity, and even in power. It's not at the forefront of strength as it once was, even if it's still good. Now, I know that there were two lists at Swice's Vancouver, including for my friends, that main decked Meowls and Vanquish Soul, just because they needed more Earths in their deck, and they decided this was the best Earth. I, for what it's worth, don't really like it. sorry. My thing is, I think it loses its luster versus Malice. I'd rather just play Lancey over it, and I'm not really looking to side deck a ton of cards just for Malice anymore. Now, Yummy can play rather poorly into Meow sometimes, specifically in your own turn, because it means all the surprise revives and synchro revives are a lot more negative for them. They have a cost attached, but oftentimes it's still not enough. That being said, it's not unplayable either, so not like I'm avoiding Meowls, but I also don't think it's a premium option. It's just a solid side staple for me at the moment. Now with that, let's move on to the next batch of trap card hand traps. So as I kind of said, there was a trend in the OCG, and there's a bit of a trend right now in the TCG, where you play hand traps that aren't actual hand effects. That way you don't play into the canine cards, and those tend to do pretty well right now. So I think Impulse and Purge are both premium quality hand traps that if your deck can play, you should play them. Special Summoning and Searching are both very prevalent in the current metagame, and the flexibility of these cards means they're absolutely worthwhile playing. So both these cards should be a 3-of in your main deck if they match your corresponding attributes. The one that is a little more iffy is Songs of the Dominator. So Songs of the Dominator is a unique clause. It's not an attribute lock. Instead, if you haven't read this card, you have to have no monsters in your grave to use it from hand. And then after you use it from hand, if you have a trap in your grave, you search your Dominus card, which is crazy. But if not, then you don't get that search. But then also after that, if you use it from the hand, you cannot use monster effects in your hand or your graveyard until the end of your next turn. So if you use it on your opponent's turn to negate a monster effect, you cannot activate Ash Blossom on your turn even. You cannot activate the graveyard effect of, say, Druid Swarm. I don't know why that'd be on your field or in your grave, but example. The point being is it's really a rather not flexible card, especially because the fact doesn't target. It's still valuable because it goes through Lupus on stuff like Dice Smasher, but ultimately I don't think it's like as good of a hand trap, but on top of that is way more restrictive. It's a solid staple for me. It's playable, but I'm not rushing to play the same way I am with the other Dominus cards. And you have to really make sure your deck utilizes it in the right way for you to play this card. Now let's move on to the more generic hand traps that we're used to seeing. Nibiru the Primal Being. So Nibiru is a card that I talked about quite a bit in my Vancouver Dracotail deck. I still think that it is probably the best hand trap in the game right now, outside of maybe the Charmies. If you can get it to resolve against any of the, I guess either Yummy or VS, it is phenomenal. Neither deck auto lose to this card, but that's the way Yu-Gi-Oh should be. A card can be good without being an auto win without counterplay. It is absolutely a card you should main deck 3 of, as long as you can find space for it. And there's not much to go over besides that. Next up, we got another trap card, Infinite Impermanence, everybody's favorite. So this hand trap is one of the best ones right now as well, because even though it targets, and for that it's not brilliant, it still negates effectively anything, as well as it's not a hand effect, meaning it's not weak to Azuna, to the Ripper bonus effect, is absolutely worthwhile to play. You can also use it on your own turn if you need to aggressively imperm something. Imperm to me is, well, not like the best hand trap, it's one of the best staple cards still. Following after that, I have Dimension Shifter. So Shifter is a fantastic card. If you can main deck it, you should. And I think it can, in VS, it can lower your plays, but it hurts Yummy and Dracotail quite a lot. It hurts Rizal quite a lot. The only thing it doesn't hurt is Malice, I guess. And I would absolutely try and include Shifter in my deck if I could. Now, I'm going to get you guys in a little early. This is all the best staple cards I have listed here. Everything else is going to be in one of the other categories. And what that means is that I think hand traps are still the way to go. This kind of highlights what I said earlier. Nothing else reaches the same heights or capabilities that the hand traps do. There are other hand traps that'll be on this list as other points, but yeah. Speaking of, we got Droll and Lockbird. So Droll and Lockbird would have been at the top of this list not too long ago, but it is not incredibly impactful against either Yummy or Dracotail, and VS has some counterplay to it, as well as a means for going Fualos and Perulio when you're doing Droll. And then does turn on Azuna, obviously, as well. So Droll has definitely degraded in some quality. That being said, when you go first against VS, I do quite like it, as well as Rizal, Mitsu. Obviously, these cards are still very good against. To me, I think people have shirked off this card a little too quickly, and some lists of Vancouver just didn't play it main or side, and you should still give some respect to the older decks, as well as they have uses versus VS. So Droll for me is one of the best side deck cards, and I would not be so quick to cut it altogether from your lists. Don't disrespect old decks too much, just because our creep has impacted some of what we have. Then let's go back to Effect Negation. We got Effect Veiler, a card I did play 3 of at YC's Vancouver, but you're not going to hear me say it's one of the best hand traps. Obviously, I already told you guys what rounded up that list. This card, again, is just okay. The thing is, it's lower in quality than almost every other hand trap, and your deck has to really support a large number of hand traps for you to want to play this card. It is, again, like Ogre and Song's Dominator, it is solid. And there's obviously extra synergies in Dracotel, which encourage me to play it. So yeah, I think this is just a solid staple, and if you're looking for extra hand traps to play, Valor is a fine, easy addition. You don't need to rush to make sure you include it in all your deck lists. That brings us to the Bystial. So I'm just going to talk about Magnemite, its own thing here, and then Druid Swarm and the others all together. So Magnemite right now is definitely worse than it has been in a while. There's not great mag targets, right? We've seen less Fiendsmith cards. We've seen less Mitsu cards. It's definitely worse, right? It's not unplayable into Yummy. It's not unplayable into VS. So it's not great. It's not very good into Dracotel either. Its applications are very limited. The only reason that I don't think this card is like straight up terrible is that there are a lot of dragons in other decks. For example, it's a dark and a monster for Dracotel and VS. And then they also both have dragons, right? Dracotel obviously has dragons, but then VS has Caesar. These cards actually end up being okay in those decks. But I think a mag is just looked at from the Bystial effect perspective. It's just kind of meh. The ability to banish and hit Lights to Darks is probably the worst it has been in quite some time. For me, this is a solid staple, but even then, it's at the lower end of the spectrum, and I almost wonder if it's a card that'll be phased out of the approaching metagame. And Druid Swarm then is a similar situation, right? I think if you need to dedicate side deck spots to light or dark hate, so for Fiendsmith, for Orcus, for Mitsu cards, then you can side deck these, but these definitely have fallen out greatly in terms of power, and I wouldn't definitely not consider the Bystials as a main deck option. But a solid side deck staple, and even then, again, this is the lower end of the spectrum for its effectiveness. Next up, we got the Cockroaches. Obviously not Max C, that card is banned, it'd be at the top of this list, but Contact C and Retaliating C. So these are cards that Triff Gaming both played to win YCS Vancouver, and they were on people's radar. So let's evaluate them. Contact C is effectively used to stop Yummy because it locks them into linking instead of synchroing really. And then they have to link into a beast monster if it locks into Beating School, which can be hard, but it's not the end of the world. I think Contact C is a little overrated. It does force bodies off the field, but I don't think it's the best way to approach the Yummy deck or matchup. As well as, depending on how people prepare for it, it might just be bad altogether. I think Triff may have been a little bit hyper or too ready to play the C cards, because I think both of them are kind of a little overrated. And Contact C for me falls in the solid side deck option, but yeah, it's not something I'm rushing to play either. And Retaliating C I think is actually better at what it does. As a Dracotel player, Retaliating C can hurt quite a lot, but Dracotel is by far the least played of the three new decks. I also want to mention this. Triff did say in his video that you can use Retaliating C against the Yummy field spells. You cannot do that. In 2017, you'd play it against Fusion Sub Zodiac, but you couldn't use it against Zodiac Barrage or Void Imagination, because those were continuous cards whose initial effects and activation did not consider reviving a monster. And because you can't change Retaliating C to effects, only card activations, you couldn't use Retaliating C against Zodiac Barrage. And it's the same thing with field spells that don't have an immediate effect on activation to revive a card. I do not think Retaliating C is relevant in the Yummy matchup. I would not play it, but it is for sure good against Dracotel. For that, I think this card is still a solid side deck staple. It's just, with it only being good against one deck and a not so popular deck, I am not rushing to play it either. And then we've got Phantasme, the Fantastical Dragon. So Phantasme is a card that I liked a lot at YCS Vancouver. I think it can be okay versus K9 VS, and it's also very good versus the Yummy deck. Versus Yummy, it can excel because links happen on both players' turns, and when that happens, you get to summon the free bodies. The free bodies are also good at pressuring out the Yummy cards. It also has the target protection, and it fixes your hand. It's a very premium quality +1. I wouldn't main deck this though, because it's not good against Dracotel, and it's just okay versus the VS deck, as well as it would compete with your Charmies and such, with more cards that aren't good going first. If you are going to main deck it, it's probably only going to be main deckable in VS, because it also functions as a dark, and it replaces some of those Charmies. But when you're comparing this against Charmies, it's not a main deckable option, as you'll overload cards that aren't playable when you start. So, I think it's one of the best side deck options, but not higher than that. And that brings me to K9 Izuna, one of the newest hand traps. So you gotta remember, this is talking mostly without the context of VS. I do think these cards are some of the best cards in the game, and I am looking out for them to have a huge impact throughout Yu-Gi-Oh! But right now, actually, they're just okay. They're a solid staple for me, but why they're not higher on this list is I think Yummy has positioned itself in a way where it's rather ineffective against that deck. So for that, that's obviously going to hurt being a popular deck. But also versus the K9 VS deck, there's enough ways to stop it with Ripper, with Mad Love, with Caesar, to make it so that this doesn't end up being that good. It does excel versus Dracotail, but again, that's the least popular of the 3 decks, so committing cards for that matchup is something that I'm not rushing to do. That being said, even if it's not good right now, I think this card will have a lasting and profound impact on Yu-Gi-Oh! As long as it doesn't get hit. Next, we got Artifact Lancia, a mainstay in side decks last format, an absolute like #1 card you have to side deck. But right now, it might not be that way. It doesn't have any matchup kind of crossover. It's really just against Malice. And with Malice for sure being not as played, you could argue that, okay, if you need side deck spots for something else, then Lancia has to go and you just raw dog it versus Malice. Don't get me wrong, this is still the card to side versus Malice. It's just you give less credit to Malice, then there's a chance you cut this card. So for that reason, it sits as the solid side deck staple for me, but nearing the top of the list, as it is something that I played and still plan on playing, as I don't want to just altogether disrespect Malice. It doesn't have the same flexibility as something like Droll though, which is why one of those is the best option and one of those is just a solid side option. All right, so quickly let's go over Ally Justice Psycho Reader, and I'm gonna gloss over this one quickly. I already discussed with the Bystials how Light and Dark removal is not as impactful now as Fiendsmith and such, and this less Blue Eyes as well. And this matters for Psycho Reader. Yummy Synchros don't target, so just chaining this to banish 2 from the grave isn't crazy important. Firmly into the cards that avoid section. Okay, so let's talk about DD Crow now. DD Crow is a hand trap that saw some decent success at the YCS, specifically among VS K9. Now, while I understand they're trying to get for synergies there with Dark Monsters, this just doesn't feel like a good hand trap, right? Graveyard removal is not unplayable, but it's not particularly good either. And discarding a card, a banish card from the grave, is rather low impact and oftentimes not actually worth the trade. So you're relying on this more as an attribute above sort of anything else. I think overall this card is kind of low-key, just not a good card right now. And it's a card I'd avoid, as hitting Dracotail's Urgula or whatever is low value, or a card of Arthurline is low value. Hitting a card to add back off Rock or Lupus is not great. It's not unplayable, it's not great either. Hitting a Snatchy Engrave is not unplayable, but not great either. And it's just all things that I would rather have be other cards at all times. So Crow, I think I'll have to pass on for now and be a card I'd avoid. And the last hand trap on this list is Vados, the Dragon of Eruption. So for this tier list, I am going to talk about less of these staples that have kind of stayed in the bottom tier for the last few formats. But while I'm still talking about Vados, there were kind of discussions about this card being playable again. Because for one, it's a dark and a monster, which means it has synergies with both VS and Dracotail. And being able to pop field spells can be relevant versus both, right? And then you give them the body that, if you can blow up, will be a field nucleator, which can be relevant, especially with something like Raisin. It's interesting. I do think that Vados is better than it has been in quite some time, but ultimately, when I'm comparing this against any other hand trap, it's still just not enough for me. It's lackluster compared to other stuff, and it can require too much of a conditional hand in order to be truly effective with a field nuke. Otherwise, just hitting a field spell is just and I'd rather Ogre do that, while Ogre has other applications like hitting Snatchy or hitting Ripper. So yeah, for me, this Vados thing is still a card I would avoid. Okay, and with the hand traps wrapped up, let's talk about Floodgates, everyone's absolute favorite tumors. First up, El Clasico, Skill Drain. So Skill Drain is actually, I think, pretty good right now. Where before you had decent play around Skill Drain, right now I think the top decks don't have the best option into it. I think the K9 VS deck is fake into Skill Drain. It has the ability, if set up, to go like Caesar, Pop, Chain, Borger, Bounce Back. But the modern VS decks don't play 3 of each of these cards. Yummy as well, I don't think has a good answer to Skill Drain. Yep, and Skill Drain is a fantastic option. In fact, I saw it in several Dracotail lists, and if it's a card you can fit neatly into your deck, by all means, I think it's worthwhile playing. Next up is Soul Drain. For me, Soul Drain is a solid side deck only staple, but not brilliant. It's really going to be only used versus like Malice, maybe some Mitsu decks, and then Dracotail, which is good, but those are all decks which are low in representation right now, which is why it's not higher on this list. But it is decent against those, so if you're presented with that opportunity, then it can do well. Next, we've got Gozen Match. I think Gozen is one of the best Floodgates again, because Vanquish Soul K9 has a lot of different attributes, and you can definitely use Gozen against the deck. Similarly, Rivalry of the Warlords. It's the same sort of shit. It's good against decks of different types. Vanquish Soul K9 has different types, so Rivalry is good. One of the best side deck options. And lastly, there can be only one. One of the best side deck options again. This time not against VS, but for VS against decks like Yummy. I think all three of the classic trio of bullshit Floodgates are the best side deck options now if you can fit them in. You have to want to be going first side deck cards to make them worth it, but if you're looking for going first cards, they do the job. That is for sure. But then, speaking of classic Floodgates, we got Anti-Spell Fragrance, whose stocks have never been lower. To me, this card is a card I'd avoid because VS is entirely like monster based, so stopping spells against them is not that important. Against Yummy, they do have spells in the deck, but it's not going to completely derail their game plan either. I think Anti-Spell is like not unplayable, but it's not good enough to consider side decking either. There's so many other cards I think that are just better that for me Anti-Spell falls to the wayside, and I would not consider it for this tournament or for any tournaments you have upcoming. Next, we've got Ally Justice Quarantine. So a cool one worth mentioning essentially is a Floodgate where while it's in the field, neither player can special summon light monsters. It's just good versus Yummy because they can summon stuff back on your turn. Obviously, Yummy is surprised and hand traps can impact it, so it's not going to solo games entirely by itself. But I think this card is solid into fields and at the start of the game, just plop it down. Where if you don't need your normal summon as much and you want something for Yummy, you can absolutely consider this card, and I think it'll do fine. So for that reason, it is a solid side deck staple. Not rushing to play it, but is very good nonetheless. Next, we got the Solemn Brigade. Solemn Judgment, Solemn Warning, and Solemn Strike. So normally you could put these all in pretty similar categories. I do think that Solemn Strike is clearly worse than the others right now, and I want to move it to a lower section. Judgment is arguably also worse right now, and Warning is where I'd stick with. Warning hits both fusion spells. It's spells like Obedient School, and you can hit hand effects like the Canine cards, where Judgment only hits one or the other, and Strike only hits one or the other. So Warning is where I want to be in that regard. Judgment does hit some other generic cards though, like Talons, Thrust, Lightning Storm, Duster, which can be relevant. So it's the only reason that Judgment may be a consideration over Warning. Having said, I think Strike never makes the cut. You're picking either Warning or Judgment, although myself, I'd lean towards Warning. So they're solid side deck staples, both of those, while for me, Strike falls firmly into a category of cards I would avoid. Okay, with the counter traps out of the way, let's move on to lingering Floodgates. I don't wonder why I play this game. Let's start off with Mistaken Arrest, a card that was rather decent in the last format, and Ryzel could struggle versus it. I think that this card is about the same in terms of its effectiveness as it was before. I think versus Vanquished Canine, if you go first, this card is still a decent Floodgate. However, it's not, it's like it was before. It's not brilliant going second. In fact, it's quite poor. And for that reason, it's obviously worse than Droll and Lockbird, even if you can use it more preemptively or more proactively rather. And it's not like it has a crazy amount of matchup spread either. It's really just like VS K9 and then Ryzel and Mitsu variants. So yeah, solid side deck staple, but not much more than that. Next, we got Different Dimension Ground, another classic Floodgate, the sort of other one with barrier that everyone loves to thrust for. Obviously, being able to banish every card your opponent sends to the grave is very good. A lot of decks struggle against that. I think if you're looking for a sidable Floodgates to use, this is probably one of the best because it has matchup spread across literally almost everything. So yeah, I think DDG is a good candidate for a trap card if you're looking for a Floodgate to side in. Next up is Artifact Sanctum. Artifact Sanctum in itself is not a lingering Floodgate, but obviously it is a thrustable way to search Artifact Lancia, which then will Floodgate the opponent. We already talked about though how Lancia stocks are kind of down, so you'd have to really want more Malice Hate to make this card a worthwhile in your side deck. So ultimately for me, this card is not worth playing right now. I think if you're going for coverage from Malice, I'd rather have a generic trap that can cover multiple certain angles, and we'll discuss what that one is shortly. Next up, we got Mischief of the Gnomes, a cool side deck card from last format, which was good against Ryzel variants and Mitsurugi cards. But how does it fare right now? Versus Ryzel, obviously it's great, but versus Mouse still does nothing. Versus Dracotail does nothing. Versus K9 VS, you can hit some rank 5 axis, but that's not the entire point of the deck. So I don't know. To me, it feels like this card is not worth playing at all, and I would avoid Mischief of the Gnomes. Next up, we got Dimensional Barrier, one of my absolute favorite cards in the game. I love this card so much. This card is in a weird spot because it's like, in theory, really good because, you know, the main decks are Exceed based, Synchro based, Fusion based, but it's also not brilliant because each of these three decks can play somewhat during the opponent's turn, right? If you have 5 mana for Dracotel, you have Azuna for K9, and in the Yummy deck, you may not be able to do this on the opponent's first turn, but if you summon a Snatchy, you can still Synchro Summon during the next turn. And Barrier isn't solo winning as much as it may have done in some other matchups in the past. It's still very much playable versus all these decks, but it's not game ending in the exact same way. If your opponent has a little bit more, they can cope a little bit better. So it's a solid side deck staple right now, but I'm not putting it at the top of the list either. Next up, we got our last lingering floodgate for this video, and that is Gravekeeper's Inscription. So this one people may not know as well, so I will reiterate it a little bit. You have to activate the start of your main phase 1. That's a normal spell, and then you pick one of 3 effects. That'll apply to both players until the end of the next turn, so your opponent's turn. It is neither player can special from the grave, or neither player can activate graveyard effects, or neither player can banish from the grave. So I played this card in my YCS winning Fiendsmith Rizal deck, because against Malice, what you do is you say neither player can banish from the grave, and now their Bystials were dead, their White Binder was dead, their Follow-Up was dead, and it hurt their deck a lot. So I liked it in that regard. However, Steven Santoli told me about using it in this format, and obviously much respected player, very strong duelist. It became clear that this card actually has pretty good application in this format. Now, the obvious one might be, oh, versus Dracotel, you say no graveyard effects, and that's very good. And yes, that's true. My opponent used this against me when they went first in Dracotel, even going second, it would hurt. But furthermore, against Yummy, you say neither player can special summon from the graveyard, and now Yummy has to tag out immediately, but beyond that, any future surprises or synchros will not be able to come back. And I think that actually is pretty worthwhile to run. I debated putting this in the need to test section because I haven't tested it myself, but Santoli I know ended up playing it at a YCS, and even though we didn't top, I think the logic is there. I'm gonna put this as one of the best side deck staples right now, and it's one of the hot take sleeper picks that I think you guys should be giving a try, especially in your VS K9 decks that deal with the opposing Yummy and Dracotel. Okay, moving on to other going first options. What about Called by the Grave and Crossout Designator? Where do those stand right now? Well, I think Called by the Grave is a side deck only solid card right now. There's not really any blowout hand traps like Droll or Lancia that demand call by as a response. So I think you can go without main decking it, or even side decking it in some cases. As well as when I'm wanting to main deck call by, I'm looking for the formats to also have call by be playable when they go second. And I'm not feeling that's the position right now, like maybe versus Lupus, or versus a Dracotel card, but it trades pretty poorly in most cases. So I do think that call by overall has depreciated in quality quite a bit. Crossout, on the other hand, has depreciated a whole lot more. With no good staples to really hit right now, no blowouts, which is a good thing, by the way. Crossout is not hitting blowouts either. And in the mirror, it more or less acts like a weird infinite impermanence type card. So Crossout is just not doing what I think it could be doing, especially as decks want more monsters and not spells or traps. Crossout is a card I just straight up avoid. Next up, we've got Blackout Laughs as another going first option, primarily as a thrust target. And this saw a bunch of play at YCS Vancouver, and I think for a good reason. It is one of the better catch-all sort of traps you can set off thrust. It's applicable across multiple different matchups. Obviously, you can declare any monster name, and that monster cannot be summoned except from the graveyard, which versus extra deck monsters is very good. So Artholion, Snatchy, or hand ones too. You can call Azuna in the hand, Jokul in the hand, Caesar. And that means it's pretty decent. You know, it's good at stopping your opponents. It's not going to solo games, but that's okay. And it does trade pretty favorably. And I think if you're looking for something to side for thrust, this is what it aimed for. It obviously also has interactions on the next turn, because when it's in the grave, you can banish it to stop monster effects. So when they reveal Holisu or Azuna, you can chain it. When they go chain by meta on your turn, you can go chain. If they ever do Snatchy on the field, you can just draw phase, call Snatchy. And I think that Blackout Laughs ends up being quite good as a result. And I would place it in the solid side deck staples, mostly though in combination with Thrust. Next up, we got the Kashtira cards. So Unicorn and Fenrir. And these are different. You don't always play both together. In fact, you oftentimes play one or the other. They do have different applications. Unicorn is used mostly to insulate combo decks when they go first, to make it punishing if your opponent hand traps you. And then they give you link bodies to turn into link monsters. But as we're progressing away almost from a link-based metagame and decks are now Synchro, Fusion, and Seed-based, Unicorn provides less value in that regard, only the extra deck rip part. And while that can matter, it's really not as important right now. So this card has depreciated a lot in the last few months, and I think firmly is a card I'd avoid right now. Then onto Fenrir. So Fenrir is a card I actually played at YCS Vancouver. I think Fenrir is a little overrated still, and I stand by it. I think it is deceptively underperforming, or not as powerful as I think it is. It can make players who are less experienced scramble, who don't know how to interact with it, but I do think that it does a lot less than people may think it does. It is an Earth and a monster, and it adds from deck to hand, so it does have synergies with Dracotal and with a VS K9. And it can begin going first in theory to kind of deal with all the turn 1 stuff, but it's not great in those spots either, right? Lupus can still make Typhon some game states. Phimena still resolves. Holisu just gets banished, or you can have a Borg or a Caesar to bounce it. But they still got to use the effect. It's not completely as broken as maybe you'd hope. It's still fine though, and can help in those spots. Going second, it's only really good versus Yummy because it's big and can force grind games easy, but in every other game state, I'd say Fenrir is poor when you go second. So for me, Fenrir is a little hard to assess. It's not, I think it's low quality, but it's not unplayable either. It's a side deck staple, but it's on the low end. Next up, we got the next Fenrir-esque card, Pancratops. It's a card I talked about a bit in a tier 0 video, which I also got wrong in the wording of the Yummy cards. I filmed it like a month before Yummy came out, and oops. Pancratops though is still fine. I think it is a little worse than I kind of originally thought. Using it into Yummy can be decent because you can still attack a dude, force an effect, and then you can pop something like a surprise face down, or force a reaction somewhere. Or even when they use Snatchy, you can chain to pop a synchro material, including the Snatchy, and that ends up being quite decent. So it's still very much like applicable into that matchup. It's not unplayable. It's just not as good as maybe I thought it was. Pancratops' other matchups can still be decent as well. Again, battle phase attack and pop is decently high valued. So I don't think it's entirely meritless, but it's not as good as I thought. It is a monster, is an Earth. It's a low quality, probably one of the lowest quality solid side deck staples that can barely scrape by as an acceptable side deck card, but I'm not rushing to play it either. There are other board breaker-esque monsters that we could consider, like Alpha, Lava Golem, Sphere Mode, but those haven't been playing in a long time. Any staple that I don't cover on this list that I've covered on past lists is probably because they were in the unplayable section or cards that avoid section before, and they're staying there. And I don't want to waste more time discussing things that ultimately don't matter. So yeah, that is why you'll see me not talk about those here. They're still poo. As for other breakers, let's start off with the quick play spells. Forbidden Droplet is a formidable card right now. Again, I don't think any breakers are deserving of being in the best staple card section, which is why you'll see nothing pushed that high. But if breakers is the route you're going for, or a mixed bag approach, like some other players have gone for, Droplet is probably one of the best ones. And you'll see almost every Yummy deck, I'm pretty sure, main deck 3 of this card, because it works well with spells and other breakers. It works well in one-card combo decks, and it can do decently into a variety of different things. It's a very multi-use. So unsurprisingly, I think Droplet does stand as one of the best board breaker options available to you. It's a solid staple overall, but higher up on the list. Next up is Book of Eclipse. My inclination is to say this card is something worth avoiding. However, I've noticed it a lot in Japanese lists, and it really makes me wonder, am I missing something? Like, I understand you have applications for both Yummy and VS K9 as disruption, or as board clears in a sense, because it makes it hard for, I mean, it weakens the field quite a bit. Every time I've used it, it's felt 1 week to Ash, week to Omni Negates. You can play around it decently, and it didn't feel impactful enough as opposed to its alternatives that could be siding instead in almost any scenario. I don't know. I think I need to test it more, but right now I would just avoid Eclipse, and we'll see. Next up, we got Super Polymerization. So Super Poly is a card that I don't think saw much success at the YCS, and it's a card that I didn't play in my Draco deck either, although I know that some people were considering it. I actually think this card might be a solid side deck staple for the moment. Part of the reason is it just seems decent into Yummy as a board wipe that can deal with Arclight effectively as well, where Eclipse maybe can't, as well as develop bodies that can help you push through things, because the body matters a lot in the matchup, right? Because if they go surprise to revive something, you can attempt to attack over it to force it over. And that is incredibly useful. Your battle phase means a lot versus Yummy. So I think Super Poly is a card that is kind of being underappreciated right now. And especially as Yummy gets more support in the near future, I'm looking towards Super Poly as a solid playable card to keep up in the metagame. Next up, we got Metaltronus. So this is a card that, truthfully, I expected to not be good in the current format. And I debated putting this in the need testing section because I haven't played with it. But here I'm, again, trusting the peers that I have respect for. I know that Jib got top 8 with Yummy, and in it, he side-decked Metaltronus. I know this is a card that Santoli also talked about, and enough other good players have pretty much said that this card is still a playable side deck option for certain mirror matches and matchups, that it is thusly still worthwhile running. It does feel like it's downgraded from the days of hitting Detonator, but the fact that there are still decent targets for it might mean it is a solid side deck option. Although I recommend, if you guys want to learn more about this card, to ask any of the people I just mentioned, because they probably have more insight in it than I do. Moving on, we got Regeki, another board breaker, moving away from the quick play spells. Another card I'd say I need testing, because I know that a well-known Latin American player, Francisco Osorio Bobadilla, did well with Dark Hole in his deck. And Regeki Dark Hole, same thing. And the point is that board wipes in theory can be good versus both Yummy and Vanquish Soul Canine, because it hits multiple things. It stops the rank up, it stops the float effects. It doesn't end the game, but it can do a decent bit in terms of destroying the field. But in my head, I feel like it doesn't do enough, and the interaction that's either in their hand or set with like the Vanquish Soul Trap, the Hollies to the Azunas, the Yummy Surprises set, still ends up being more than I'd be happy with dealing with for Regeki to be a card I consider worth playing. But my kind of lack of knowledge in this position is what leads me to say it's something that I want to test before making a final conclusion about. This is the last card in this category, guys. I promise I'd like to give you more concrete answers towards things, but my intuition says it's not very good. It's just that other people and results have shown otherwise, and that is why it ends up in this section. Next up, another classical board breaker is Change of Heart. Very popular card. I love this card a lot, and oftentimes when this card is good, it's an indicator of a decent format. In this format, however, I think it's rather poor, and for obvious reasons. Versus the Yummy deck, you can chain Synchro. Versus the Canine deck, you chain Rank Up or chain Bounce, or you steal something that's relevant. Or versus the Dracotail deck, for one, something good to steal, but also you can chain Diffuse. So yeah, Change of Heart does not do well right now at all, and this card is just, I'd avoid it at all costs pretty much. Next we got the board breaker back row cards, Duster and Lightning Storm. So these are cards that I'm constantly hating on. I'm one of the players who I love playing through back row. I feel very confident in my ability to do so, and I know that's not something everyone really feels, because that unless I really feel like I need something for a specific back row, I don't cite back row removal. So if it was just me, I'd probably put this as a card I'd avoid, and you'll rarely see me playing them. But they do have enough merits that you can consider playing it. Hitting Yummy Surprises, for example, is playable-ish, but I don't love it. The bigger one, though, is versus VS Canine, right? It forces the rank up spell, so they don't get the pop off it. But then also pops the trap card, right? Which they probably won't chain because it nukes their own field. They will chain them, they won't nuke the field, which is like fine. And then it just forces it because that's one of the best disruptions. But the thing is, though, like you're still playing through so many other disruptions there that this really has to be used only if your entire deck struggles with only the trap card. If you can deal with everything else, and that's the final like destination you end on your thought process, then fine, maybe you play this card. But to me, these feel lackluster overall, and I just don't think they're worth it. I'm gonna put them at the bottom of side deck staples that are just solid. I really hesitate to put them high up on this list, and I even think it may be too high. Next up is Evenly Matched, a card I am also notoriously hated on for quite a long time. I think this card is overrated as all shit. I think that's true right now. If every new format feels like people resurge like, oh wow, Evenly might be playable again. If you hit K9 VS, one, they could make Werewolf in main phase, which bluffing Evenly is good in that regard. But then you rip a card in your hand then and still keep other disruptions. And then there's also still going to be Holly Sue in hand. There's still going to be Azuna potentially. And it means you can still very easily lose. And when that's your battle phase, they can play more for follow-up, which matters a lot. The sort of comparison I gave my students is if you get even lead and you're playing VS, but you kept like a handful of Holly Sue and Azuna, it's almost like now your opponent gets to go first, but you start with Holly Sue Azuna in your hand. Yeah, not the best when you think about it that way. For me, it's a no bueno card. I'm not big on Evenly, and I don't think you should be either. Next up was Ultimate Slayer. This was the king against Detonator, one of the best cards you could play. The Aggregator and Twins was so impactful, but let's be real, that's not happening right now. Like versus the Canine deck, the Detonator is not the same as a Werewolf or a Ripper. Plus, you can't always target it. So Slayer for me is just an easy card to cut. Versus Yummy, if you hit a Synchro, they can go chain a spell or whatever, like Surprise, and then chain to Synchro with Snatchy. So it doesn't actually do that much there either. So yeah, card I'd avoid very easily. Exceed Encore. More Exceed removal. We already discussed how this was bad. So this card has fallen from grace, from being a very powerful option to back into irrelevance, where it probably belongs. And similarly, this type of removal, Gordian Slicer, falls there. Very much designed as a way to counteract Detonator. With all that stuff kind of falling to the wayside, this card follows suit as a card that's really just not important. Next up, Lullaby of Obedience, a card which I said was okay as an option as to side deck before, Now, how does it fare? Honestly, not great. In the VS sort of scenario, if you steal a Holly Sewer or a Raisin type of card, then when it goes to grave or bounce to hand, it goes to their hand or their grave, which both can have benefits for them. So it's just their worst starter. Yummy should have enough playable cards without it that you don't need Lullaby either. And Jiggle Tail's terrible, obviously. So yeah, Lullaby for now is a card to avoid. Technically not unplayable, but there has to be something better than this. That brings me to my last 2 cards on this list. And again, everything I didn't mention is a card that has kind of stayed in irrelevance from the previous formats. And I didn't want to spend time addressing. First up is Triple Tactics Talent. I should tell you what the next card is as well. Triple Tactics Talent, one of the best cards just a few months ago and still decent last format, has continued to kind of fall for me in terms of effectiveness. You see, for me, it is just a solid staple. It's not brilliant in VS or Tractor Tail. And then when you're going second into fields, it's not game breaking the same way it kind of was before. Stealing a card or drawing 2 is still valuable, and it's by no means bad, but it's not stealing Detonator or a Duo Drive or a Caesar or an Appaloosa, which are the cards that really made talents sing. So for me, it is a solid staple. Main or side, it can kind of be flexible with which way you want to go, but it's not screaming broken the way it was mere months ago. And Thrust for me feels relatively similar. Thrust often follows the trend of it'll kind of match talents in terms of use unless some other spell really shines. We could make an argument right now that it is that way because of Yummy, right? With Obedient School and Engage being very powerful spells this card can search. But I do think that it is actually not as powerful as a breaker as, say, Droplet. I'm looking at Yummy lists right now. Droplet is the card that has guaranteed 3 of, or Thrust is not always main decked, and even side decked is sometimes just a 2 of. Its application as a side deck card to traps is not to be forgotten either, though. It is important. It's a spell card, which obviously means it has less merits, and it's sometimes not playable going first, and Yummy can lose to a breaker sometimes, or a string of breakers, like you read my feature match I did. My opponent, I'm pretty sure, had Thrust and Talents in their hand that game, and if those were real disruptions, I might have lost, but instead, I was able to crack the field, enter a grind, and those cards are significantly worse in those grind game scenarios now than they were on turn 1. They're definitely worth running, both these cards. They're just solid staples, though. I think they fallen from their top spots, and I don't know when that'll change. That wraps up the list. You can see here, these are my opinions, and you can see common trends here, where monsters, I think, are better than spells and traps for most decks, but also hand traps are typically king. Graveyard removal is like Bystials are kind of at a low right now. Certain Floodgates are a lot less playable than others. And removal right now is in a sketchy place, albeit I feel like I've not given it the true time of day to make a profound assessment. Hopefully that gives you guys a good idea of how you want to go about building your deck. Obviously, each deck you will have to assess your needs a little bit differently. The biggest thing I tell people when I build a side deck or decide non-engine is not what non-engine is good, but what purpose I need the non-engine to fill, and find the card that best suits that slot. That's why these lists can be useful starting points to evaluate cards in a metagame, but they shouldn't be a direct parallel to how you build your deck. And I want you guys to first and foremost grab that idea, because that's how you improve deck building drastically. As I said, if you guys have any suggestions for how the list could be improved, any cards that I missed that aren't completely relevant, then I'm happy to hear your suggestions, and they can be included on future lists as well. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Thank you. See you all next time. Peace.